My name is James Garza. I am a resident of Dripping Springs, and my family and I moved here in 1997. And during 1997, my family came from Houston, and we had moved here to start a business and to find a community that would better fit what we were looking for in a small town atmosphere. In 1997, I also started a company that would grow to become a nationally recognized firm representing corporations, Fortune 500 corporations. And all of that is today done in this small town of Dripping Springs. My connection to Dripping Springs ISD started with the fact that when I began the business in about 1999, a young lady came to work for me who was involved in this foundation. And by just happenstance, she asked me near the end of the year if I was interested in making a donation to an organization that she was working with. And I asked her who it was and what their purpose was all about. And she told me the organization was the Dripping Springs Education Foundation. And after exploring a little bit more about it, I was impressed with what the organization was attempting to do here in Dripping Springs. Beginning in about 1999, my firm started to see profits, and as a result of those profits, it had always been my hope that whenever I managed to become successful, I would find a way to give back to the community that I was living in. This business and this town provided that opportunity for me. So starting in 1999 and all the way through today, our firm is donated to the Education Foundation every year, and it has been my good fortune to have been involved with that organization since 1999 as well. I joined the board in 2000 and still today sit on that board, and I'm amazed by the number of gains and opportunities that we have provided for young students, for teachers, scholarships. It's just been an amazing ride, and I'm glad to see that it has grown into what it is today. The reason I donate, well, it has more to do with where I came from, and to give you a little bit of story about that. As I said, I came from Houston, Texas, and I was raised in my early years in the barrios of Houston. And education wasn't a real focus of my life and my parents. My dad with an 8th grade education. My mom, who had graduated high school, had been a laborer her whole life. Secondary education just wasn't a focus. By happenstance again, and through good fortune, my junior year, met a couple of teachers who took an interest in me. They saw something in me that I had yet to recognize in myself. And those two teachers became mentors, and through their tutorial, through their mentoring, they instilled something that when I reflect back on my life to see what is the difference between me and some of the friends who are not as successful as I am, it's helped me realize that the only difference is education. These two teachers took an interest in me and were able to show me what was required to go to a secondary institution of learning. And they provided a path for me to apply to college, something that no one in my family had ever done. They tutored me on what type of courses were going to be beneficial to me as I grew older. And because of those two young ladies who took me under their wing, today I own a business. I have 20 employees working for me, and it all is a direct result of two teachers who took the time to find something in me and work with me. As fate would have it, as I said, in 1997 we moved to Dripping Springs, and that year my son started 2nd grade at Dripping Springs Elementary. And it was after a month of going to school, my wife and I received that dreaded phone call that every parent was always worried about. It's the parent-teacher conference. And we were wondering, what could my son have done already in less than 30 days? And much to our surprise, what the conference was about was the teacher had wanted to speak to us about whether or not we'd ever had my son tested for slow learning. And it kind of puzzled us because we had never noticed that in him before. And so we discussed the education process that he had been through in the Central Texas school district that he had come from. And when she heard where it was from, she kind of paused and she looked at us and she said, okay. She goes, I know what the problem is. She goes, that school district has a tendency to be a little behind the Dripping Springs curriculum. And now that I know that, I will work with your son and we will get him caught up to the rest of the students in the class. That teacher, and I never forgot her name, Mrs. Ledbetter, because of her interest and because of her concern over one student who was behind, she took the time to make sure that my son got all the basics that he needed. And in 2008, that young man graduated from Dripping Springs High School. Today, he is attending college at another major university in Texas, and he is attempting to major in business. He is doing very well today. And after seeing how everything came back around, I realized that by providing funds to the Dripping Springs Education Foundation, there was a possibility that some teacher out there might receive those funds that I'm donating. And that teacher or that educator might recognize that same spark in someone else, some young man, some young lady, and maybe they just needed a little bit of help to bring the two together and possibly provide another opportunity for another young person. It's my hope that the funds that I donate every year find their way to that educator, that professional who is interested enough to go beyond what this school district requires. And if by some chance those funds help some young man, some young lady prosper in the future, then I have done what I set out to do. And that's pay back to this community who've given so much to myself and my family. And as I move forward, this being my last year on the board, I have reflected back enough to have been fortunate to have seen what some of the things were that came out of it, some of the scholarships that went to kids, some of the teacher grants that were provided to the educators, and how those funds were used. As a member of the grant committee, I was actually able to focus on some of the criteria that was required in order for these teachers to obtain the grants. And the excitement that would come from them when they got those checks, it's incredible. It's like no other feeling that you could ever imagine. We weren't talking about tens of thousands of dollars. We're talking about $200, $500. Yeah, there was a few that were for $3,000 or $4,000. But whatever the opportunity was that was granted to these professionals, that excitement and the opportunities that they presented to their students was absolutely incredible. I will continue to donate to the Dripping Springs Education Foundation for as long as possible, because I believe in the mission of what this foundation is doing, and I believe that the professionals here at the Dripping Springs Independent School District all have one objective in mind, and that's to make sure that the leaders of tomorrow, the leaders that come from Dripping Springs Independent School District, are ready for the future.